All right, so hello, my name is Eli Logan, and today I'll be analyzing Americans' governmental trust and their opinions on nuclear power. So the problem with nuclear power is that it's been very controversial ever since its creation in the 1950s, and the public opinion on this technology, especially any technology dealing with electricity generation, is necessary to determine the future use of said technology. Some examples of this are, is it privately owned, is it governmentally owned, etc. So some definition before I get started. Governmental trust is defined as the foundation upon which the legitimacy of public institutions are founded, and this is necessary for public cohesion and social cohesion. And nuclear power is defined as the utilization of fission with low enriched uranium fuel to turn turbines to create electricity. So the significance of my research is to help nuclear power companies to possibly change their practices. If they are governmentally owned, they could switch to privately owned, or vice versa, depending on the outcome of my survey. And this could be also used to update trends over time of governmental trust and of nuclear power. An example of a trend for nuclear power acceptance is this Gallup poll, which is one of the main sources that I use for my method. It shows the difference between those who somewhat favor and strongly favor nuclear power and those who somewhat or strongly oppose nuclear power. So when this poll was started in 1994, it was a 57-37 gap, but in 2019, there was a 49-49 even split between the two oppositions. So for my research, I decided to focus on a gap between nuclear power, public acceptance, and governmental trust. So for nuclear power, I wanted to focus on producing electricity efficiently at an economic-friendly rate and an eco-friendly rate. And then I also wanted to focus on public acceptance, which is just the general population's opinion on a topic. And then on governmental trust, which is the trustworthiness of the government in the eyes of those who it is governing. So this led me to my main research gap, which is correlating the use of nuclear power for generating electricity to public trust in the federal government. So some sources that led me to this were my main foundational source, which is called Sun, Wind, Rock, and Metal. This is a paper by scientists from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, who surveyed people on their opinion of nuclear power based on 3 different factors, which is age, gender, and political affiliation. The second source that was very helpful in my research was the Gallup poll I previously showed. I was able to pull not only the survey structure, but I was able to pull the analysis part, and I was able to pull some individual questions that I used in my survey from this source. And any additional data I got from a paper called USA's Social Divide. This is by Nuclear Engineering International, and it allowed me to narrow in on my gap. And it also did provide other factors that could influence somebody's opinions of nuclear power, which are also, are they college educated and what is their career path? So all of this combined led me to my research question of how does the amount of governmental trust of Americans impact their overall perception of the use of nuclear power for electricity generation? So my hypothesis originally going into this was that those who have less governmental trust will be more inclined to support the use of nuclear power for electricity generation. This in turn would create a negative correlation between the two topics, resulting in a graph somewhat like this. So for my survey, I included 3 demographic questions. Each of these is inspired by the Sun, Wind, Rock, and Metal paper, so they are age, gender, and political affiliation. I had 10 opinion-based questions. 7 of these opinion-based questions are based on nuclear power acceptance, and 3 of these are based on governmental trust acceptance. And I also included 1 consent and checkbox question in order to inform my participants that their responses are going to be used in a research paper. This was then distributed to a national list of AP teachers and then to a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. So for my analysis, I decided to go with a correlational analysis using the Pearson coefficient. The Pearson coefficient ranges from a -1 to a 1, -1 meaning it's perfectly negatively correlated, and 1 meaning it's perfectly negatively correlated, with the 0 being perfect no correlation whatsoever. And a correlational analysis will allow me to easily show a linkage between 2 distinct topics, which in my case would be nuclear power and governmental trust. And here's an example of what this would look like. So on the left you have your first variable set, which will go into your set that you're able to put into a spreadsheet, and the same with the other side. And those 2 combined will allow you to get your Pearson coefficient of that -1 to 1. And here's an example of a graph I used to perform my correlational analysis. On the left here, the 1 through 6, is the strongly agree to strongly disagree scale, 6 being strongly agree and 1 being strongly disagree. And the question 1 and 2 are the nuclear power, or the governmental trust questions, and the 3 through 8 are the nuclear power questions. So some limitations of this survey method is that I did have a low sample size of only 95 participants. I was aiming for around 250 to 500 participants. I did have low diversity within my survey population as well. About 64% of my respondents were male, and 61 respondents were from age 18 to 24, not leaving much room for the other age ranges and gender. So this could also, there could also be some possible bias in the survey method because the University of Tennessee in Knoxville is one of the top schools in the nation for nuclear energy education. Thereby, the students could be somewhat skewed in their results and their visions of nuclear power. So for my results of my survey, when I asked what the gender of the participant is, 64.2% of the respondents were male, 34.7% were female, and another 1 to 2% said they prefer not to say. For the age of my respondents, 61.1% of these were the age 18 to 24, with 2 smaller groups of 35 to 44-year-olds and 45 to 54-year-olds, with some even smaller pockets of 25 to 34-year-olds, 55 to 64-year-olds, and 65 plus. But obviously the main component of this is the 18 to 24-year-olds. Then I also asked, which of the following political parties do you most identify with? Plurality of 41.1% chose Democrat. Secondly, there was 32.6% Republican, and a surprising 10.5% Libertarian, because Libertarians only make up 2 to 3% of the national voting population, so this was very surprising to me, with another about 20% of other parties such as Constitution, Independent, Green Party. So for my first governmental trust question I asked, it was what % of the time do you think you can trust the government in Washington to do what is right? Based on this bell curve, the main response to this was 26 to 50% of the time, and all the responses seem to center around the middle, with very few going to the extremes for this question, and also for the next governmental trust question, which is what percentage of the politicians of Washington do you believe are at least somewhat corrupt? A majority of the respondents were from 51 to 75% in that median range, but there were more drifting towards the greater than 95% side, so with more on the anti-governmental trust side. So for my nuclear power questions, my first one was how important do you think nuclear energy will be in meeting this nation's electricity needs in the years ahead? A majority of the respondents were in the extremely important, very important, and somewhat important range, with very few choosing not so important or not at all important. And then the next question would be, in the next decade, do you think that nuclear energy is importance in meeting electricity needs will increase? A majority of the respondents chose agree, with a surprising amount not choosing the strongly agree as shown by in the previous question, but still on the agree side. This graph does show more of a bell curve shape than the other one. For the next question, which we should definitely build more nuclear power plants in the future. A majority was strongly agree and agree, with decreasing on the strongly agree scale, or strongly disagree side. This trend will continue with this next question of overall, how do you feel about the use of nuclear energy as one of the ways to provide electricity in the United States? An overwhelming majority chose strongly approve and approve, with very few on the opposition. And the next question is, we should take advantage of all low-carbon energy sources, including nuclear, hydro, and renewables. An overwhelming majority chose strongly agree, with nobody choosing disagree and only one person choosing strongly disagree. And for the final question, nuclear power plants operating in the United States are safe and secure. An overwhelming majority chose to strongly agree and agree, with surprising secondary of neither, and rarely anybody choosing disagree or strongly disagree. So some additional data that I wanted to include that didn't make into the final correlational analysis was the first question of would you say the government is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves or for the benefit of the people? An overwhelming majority of 77.9% chose that the government's looking out for themselves, with only 22.1% saying that the government's for the benefit of the people. And then I also asked, what type of organization do you believe to do a better job of managing a nuclear waste storage facility? This was very evenly split among the answer choices of an independent federal authority with a corporate-style board of directors, a federal government agency, a privatized business following federal guidelines, or they don't know. A plurality of 32.6% did choose an independent federal authority with a corporate-style board of directors, which is kind of the median response between fully governmentally owned and fully privately owned. So it does have the federal authority, but it does have the corporate-style board of directors with that privately owned sector. So there is that median range in there for that question. And here's the final results of my correlational analysis. For the question of what percent of the time do you think you can trust the government in Washington to do what is right, all of the nuclear power questions were negatively correlated, and these are all strong negative correlations as well, with the highest actually being 0.96, or negative 0.96, which is extremely close to perfectly negatively correlated. For the next question of what percentage of the politicians in Washington do you believe are at least somewhat corrupt, for the nuclear power question of overall how do you feel the use of nuclear energy as one of the ways to provide electricity in the United States, and the question of taking advantage of all low-carbon energy sources, these were both strongly negatively correlated to that. And the questions of meeting the nation's electricity needs in the years ahead, building more nuclear power plants, and how safe and secure are nuclear power plants, those are all weakly correlated to this question. And the question of do you think that nuclear energy's importance will increase in the future? This was actually weakly positively correlated, which is surprising for this question. But this is the only positive correlation I have, and it's a weak positive correlation. So what do all these numbers mean? It means these negative correlations mean that people with more governmental trust will be less likely to support the use of nuclear power for electricity generation. And on the opposite side, people with less governmental trust will be more likely to support the use of nuclear power in the future. So this does support my original hypothesis that I did propose. And here are some graphs showing the visuals of those numbers. This is the question of what percent of the time can you trust the government in Washington to do what is right. You can see all the negative correlations here with some stronger than others. And for the next question of what percentage of the politicians in Washington do you believe somewhat corrupt, you can see on this red line it is positively correlated but very weakly, but with the rest being negatively correlated. So for the 1 through 6 on the right, those are each of the nuclear power questions that are being correlated. The y-axis denotes the number of responses for the nuclear power questions, and the x-axis denotes the number of responses for the governmental trust questions. So in the future, more research can be focused on why somebody would choose a strongly agree or strongly disagree answer, what factors would move somebody to be supportive of nuclear power and not supportive of nuclear power. So that can be future analyzed in the future. And
Oral defense panel, you may start your questions.
Eli, how did you determine which results generated by your research methods were most important in forming your new understanding?
okay, so in my presentation, only 2 of those questions were not included. Those are because those aren't going to be able to be correlated to the nuclear power questions. So I decided to go with and present the questions that will be correlated, and to provide the correlational coefficients, which will be more influential in getting across my point of the research that I provided. And some of the questions that I proposed in my research were not necessary for the correlational analysis, and those that were, I got the correlational coefficients for.
Eli, how does your new understanding address a gap in the scholarly conversation?
So my new understanding is that governmental trust is negatively correlated to nuclear power, and this has previously never been touched upon by researchers. So there are many things that have been correlated between nuclear power, such as age has been correlated, gender has been correlated, college education has been correlated, but governmental trust has never been correlated whatsoever to nuclear power. So I decided to focus on this, and I did find results that were interesting, and that I am happy that there were some conclusive results.
And then finally, what was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it in your future endeavors?
So the most important research skill I gained from this was learning how to correlate different sets of data. Previously, I was unaware of how to do this, but through research and through study, I was able to correlate this data and to actually get usable quantitative data in order to present and to show how important this is. And I did take away a lot of good skills of how to distribute a survey, how to interact via email, how to be professional, BCC, and all that.
I would like to open the floor for additional questions.
I feel really bad for calling your presentation. Let me just say that real quick. Anyways, but here's my like I don't have a question. I just want to really compliment. I think it's an interesting thing because it's kind of funny because like a lot of people said they wanted the government to run the power plant, and they said they don't trust the government. I just think that's kind of an interesting.
I do too.
I love that song that it was like, we don't really know who should do what, but somebody
Yeah.
should do something. It's like, we're not doing it, you know, or whatever, but, so like, such is America, right? But, so I think that you're really interesting in this because this has been an interest of yours. I know that your academic advisor came from your experience
Yes.
there, and then you were continuing your education there. So I think it's maybe more of a comment, or if you can elaborate on it, like, I think it's really cool how things are coming full circle for you.
They are.
And I hope that it's a springboard for the future. And are you still in touch with your academic advisor? Has he or she seen the results of this? Do you plan to?
I am in touch with him still. I will send the results to him.
Yeah, that's really cool. Really, really cool.
I was kind of, because I know that you're going to go on to study like nuclear science.
I am.
And stuff, and I was wondering if, doing this research and preparing this and looking at all those correlations and all that, did that in any way affect like where you want to go with your career on that path?
It has made me more excited to go into this field. I still want to go into nuclear engineering, and this research, both in seminar and in AP research, has wanted me to kind of move into the field of nuclear energy generation rather than using nuclear energy for just like how to build power plants and stuff like that. I kind of want to move into the generating electricity and the more of the theoretical philosophy side of that.
Eli, I noticed that you had kind of your chunk of people who were like college age, and then you had some older individuals. Was there a difference, and you may not have even looked at this, in the correlation of those two pockets? I'm just curious if the younger had a different view of it than your older group.
I didn't analyze that, which I probably will go back and look at that. But there were a lot of correlations between, like, the public, there was between the people's political affiliation and their acceptance of nuclear power. It was more Republicans tend to be more apt of nuclear power, and that was a correlation I did see looking through my data.
I just wanted to compliment you on your clarity in the presentation. It was super clear and it just caught my eye, like looking at the presentation and showing what exactly you wanted us to understand and take away from it. So I just wanted to compliment.
Thank you.
All right, Eli, thank you so much.
Thank you.